if we wanted to, we could work all the time. Like, that's the thing. Like, there's no 9 to 5 here. Like, you could be like, yeah, I guess I should be working, or I have work to do, so I should be working. And when we grow up in homes where our parents told us you can't play until you get all your chores done or until you get all your homework done, it can feel very like conflicted or guilt ridden to enjoy yourself when there's like work to do.
The water's fine, homie, jump into the deep end. Sow it, you will reap it. We're talking how to start it, how to grow it, how to keep it. Take a deep breath. You are now rocking with Founder Secrets.
Megan, very nice to have you on today to Founder Secrets. Megan Bruneau from Canada, joining us from Nashville, Tennessee, though.
Yes, a new Nashvilleian. Of a couple weeks.
It seems like there's like a lot of entrepreneurs that come from Canada. Is there something magical about like Canada versus the US for founding companies?
I would probably say the opposite. I think that's why entrepreneurs come from Canada. There's a selection effect there, Flavie, where you're like noticing all the entrepreneurs who come to the States to be entrepreneurs because Canada's not super entrepreneurial. Like, that's a sweeping statement, but for better or worse, the States is much more capitalistic, right? So I did not grow up, and this is just my own experience, but I think a lot of people share this experience. I did not grow up like being encouraged to start my own business or, do my own thing. Like, it was like, be a lawyer, like every other person in your family on either side. So yeah, I think you probably know a lot of Canadian entrepreneurs because they do come to the States for more opportunity. Outside of like Toronto, I think actually has like a pretty good startup culture, and Vancouver's like a small one, and Montreal. But otherwise, there's not a ton of entrepreneurial communities, I would say, there.
So where'd you take a left turn and didn't become a lawyer?
Well, I mean, let's see, we've only got 30 minutes, so I'm going to try to give you the abridged version. But, well, I mean, I knew I wanted to be a therapist from a pretty young age. So even though, yes, everyone in my family was lawyers and I was very argumentative and like sometimes still can be, depending on if you're my boyfriend or not, I decided I was like, I want to be a therapist. And part of that was because my parents went through a pretty rough divorce when I was young. And I sort of, between what I went through that experience and then also what they went through, I from early on was like, okay, I think like this is what I want to do. And I loved talking with people. And then when I was in high school, I struggled with eating disorders and depression and anxiety and like all the fun things that come along with those. Oftentimes eating disorders, like any type of addiction, is just like a symptom, right, of the underlying issues, which are usually, in my case, was perfectionism, depression, and anxiety, which is all kind of rooted in shame and this belief that like we're not good enough, which is a little foreshadowing of how a lot of founders feel, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I work with. So yeah, I got really into psychology and like knew even before I went to university, like that this is what I wanted to do. So I was pretty, I wouldn't say I was like super goal oriented necessarily, but I did go like straight through and just did like the 7 years of education and came out of that like really young and was like working as a therapist when I was like 24, 25. And I did that for a few years at a college, in their student health and counseling center. And like, I loved it. And it was an amazing job. And it was like, again, I was like faculty, like have a great, what we call pension, 401k in the States, and, great benefits, 8.5 weeks vacation, all the sick days, all that kind of stuff. I got off at 4:30 every day, although I had to be in at 8:30, I'm not a morning person. So that didn't work for me. But anyway, I digress. During that time, like in my personal life, I had gone through a really rough breakup, and like, I don't know, have either of you guys ever been heartbroken?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. So like, how you're when you're in that phase of a heartbreak where you're like, nothing matters. Like, I'm just gonna like take any risk. I'm just gonna do anything. Like, if the plane goes down, I don't care. Like, it's like, you just like have this phase where you just like don't care. And also like, I was really trying to just like do anything I could to feel better. And I started doing a lot more traveling. And I went to New York, and this was back in 2012, the first time I went to New York. And I got there and I was just like, I don't know what it is about this place. Like, I have to be here. Like, this place I belong here. Like, I've never felt like so, I don't know, like other people. Like, I always felt like I was a little different and like talked too quickly and too much and, had all these like sort of like zany ideas. And so I kind of just like, was like, I had this, experience of both being like so in love with New York, but also I had this like grief because I was like, well, I can never live here. I mean, I'm Canadian. I'm a therapist. Like, how would this ever work? And around the same time, I had started a blog and I had started writing for a couple of different publications. And one of them, it's called Mind Body Green. They ended up having a conference. This was in 2014. And I was one of their like more like prolific writers or whatever. I luckily had like a ton of views on articles. So like, we're going to invite you along with like 2 or 3 other writers and a bunch of entrepreneurs and investors and influencers to this conference in Arizona. And I was like, cool. What's an entrepreneur? What's an investor? What's an influencer? Like literally didn't know what any of those things were. So this is like how recent, like my journey into this has really only been in the past decade. And so at the time I was like, you know what? This doesn't really make sense, but like sounds kind of cool. And I had that like, ooh, well, I was one of a few writers. So like, I'll go. And I went. And while I was there, I met a founder who had a company in New York. And like questionable as to whether or not he just wanted to sleep with me, but he was like, I could sponsor your visa in New York. And I was like, wait, you could sponsor? And he's like, yeah, you have to come work at my company, my startup. And like, I can, you know, maybe you can come work there and you'll be able to live in New York, like have a visa and everything. And so I was like, cool, like done. So I like flew home from that conference, like quit my job, broke up with my like live-in boyfriend and like moved to New York, like to work for the startup. And I didn't even know what a startup was. Like literally, like it's like the most impulsive, like irrational decision. But it was like the best, I mean, truly like the best decision in terms of like, you know, when you look back on your life and you're like, it could have gone this way or it could have gone that way. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. So I moved to New York with like one suitcase. I peripherally knew like one person from that conference there. And just started like, first of all, I started working at this startup, which like, I'm not going to name the startup, but it was, kind of what you like imagine the cliche, like totally dysfunctional, like seems really glitzy from the outside. But once you get into the inside, you're like, what is happening here? Like everyone's crying. Like it's like there's people like getting fired left, right, and center, but like also people being hired for positions that like shouldn't even be in the company. Mine was one of those, by the way. Like I was like, you shouldn't have hired me. Like,
you were part of the problem.
I was part of the problem. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, so I'll try to speed this up here, but basically that was where I then became really immersed in like startup culture, entrepreneurship. And because the company itself was in the wellness world, I also ended up connecting with, if you guys are familiar with like the Summit community. So that community, I became more connected.
Taylor's been to Summit.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So yeah, so like, because I'm, you know, sort of more like spiritual, mental health, all that kind of stuff, it like fit in well with that community. And then just like the couple of people I knew from that conference were also part of that. So I found myself being surrounded by a ton of entrepreneurs. And like, basically that was the community I started to run in. And, you know, that was 2015. And so basically in the past, I guess almost 9 years, from there forward, I mean, I lasted at the startup for a few months and I was like, this is not what I came here to do. Like, it was one of these things where they're like, we're democratizing wellness. And you're like, but like, how are you? I mean, again, didn't know anything about startup culture before and didn't realize democratizing
what
was
does
like,
that mean?
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm like, but you're selling green juice to the 1%. I don't understand. They're like, we're a positive body image. I'm like, but everyone on your imagery is like white and emaciated. Like something's not adding up here. So anyway, so I left. I was like, this does not align with my values. And honestly, like I felt very fortunate that if I couldn't figure out a way to stay in the States, like I was going back to Vancouver, British Columbia, like one of the best cities in the world. Like it's not like I was like, you know, I have a lot of privilege. And so I ended up just kind of like hustling and grinding away. Like I started, I mean, questionable. I mean, some of this definitely was not within the realm of like what I could work in under my visa, but I think it's fine now because whatever the visa I have now is legit. But, you know, I was like seeing people out of coffee shops for like $60 cash. Like, you know, it's like the things that ethically in like my, you know, master's program, like my supervisor would have been like, you're doing what? But, you know, I think like we New Yorkers know, like when you kind of just have to hustle and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna like make this work by any means necessary. And I was like doing odd jobs for people and like, you know, working for, you know, $20 an hour here, like, you know, $50 an hour here. Like just, I mean, it's so interesting when you look back on that and you're like, I can't believe like what I did to try to just survive. And I wasn't living like a fancy high New York life, right? Like I wasn't going out to fancy dinners or, you know, Flavia and I know each other through like Soho Works. I wasn't belonging to Soho House then, stuff like that. Right. So, anyway, so yeah, so basically over the next almost decade now, I really honed in on working with entrepreneurs because I realized that like, this is a demographic that not only has like so much stress and so many conditions in their lives that like make them vulnerable to mental health challenges, but like we're drawn to entrepreneurship, like because of our trauma a lot of the time, right? Like we have like challenges with authority. Maybe we're like super like creative. Maybe we like fantasize from, or we have fantasy from like a place of trauma. And that's one of our coping mechanisms, you know, like we are like hyper independent. Like there's so many qualities that entrepreneurs have that also align with like depression, anxiety, ADHD, addictions, all of that kind of stuff. And there is like a higher propensity in entrepreneurial types, even if you control for like the lifestyle, which is incredibly isolating and stressful. And like a lot of entrepreneurs don't even feel like they can tell their spouse like the truth about what's happening because they're worried about like, you know, their partner either like leaving them or not, or being totally stressed that they can't pay bills and stuff. So again, could go on about all of that, but basically that's where I took the hard right or the hard left or whatever it was. And, we'll call it a hard right because it was the right decision. And ended up in New York until a couple weeks ago or a month ago, I guess.
What do you think of, cause I read, what's it called?
Brene Brown?
No, Burn.
Burn Rate. And
Burn
Andy,
and
Andy Dunn, I think. Is that what it is?
Here in New York as well. Yeah. And the guy started Bonobos.
Yes. Yeah.
And great book. I thought it was great. I also thought it was really well written. Like it was a very interesting story. You know,
totally.
There were parts of it where you didn't see that coming. And then at the end, you know, he's on this kind of book tour right now and he's kind of going around raising awareness around mental health. And to me, I wonder if there are, and I'm curious what you think, that there are almost like two ways of talking about mental health when it comes to founders. One is completely ignore it. Nobody talks about it. That seems to be a status quo. The other one is it's terrible. You're going to end up in a mental institution. It's horrible. Founders are broken. And I'm curious are there any positive attributes of some of these quirks that that founders have in your experience, or are they all kind of just broken, negative people?
Oh my gosh, no, not at all. That's why I love working with them so much. I mean, like founders are so resourceful. Like, I mean, that's what you all do is like be so solution oriented and be like, how can I fix this problem? Like there's a way, and like so perseverant. Like you have to be able to be successful as an entrepreneur, right? Like if you're someone who gives up at the first challenge, right? Or thinks that like, okay, well, this means that I just can't do this, then, I mean, you're not going to make it very far. So there's this resourceful, perseverant, like courageous. My gosh, like you have to have so much courage, especially when a lot of people like don't always have the support of like their family or their friends or their partners. I mean, I interview entrepreneurs myself, and like the number of times where I hear stories where like either like a friend or a mentor or a family member or a loved one was like, I mean, are you okay that you're like coming up with this? Like, it's a nice, like, that's a nice little like kind of hobby or that, like, but you know, stick to what you're good at, or like stick to like the great job that you have or whatever. Right. So you have to be like so courageous, and it's lonely and it's isolating at times and it's hard, you know, and it's incredibly anxiety provoking, right? Like to feel like you're wholly responsible for not only your own like livelihood, but oftentimes many other people's, right? Which I do think a lot of founders take on undue responsibility of, you know, all of their employees, more so than is helpful a lot of the time. But yes, I mean, just to answer your question, Taylor, like entrepreneurs are like wildly creative. I mean, most of the people I work with and the entrepreneurs I hang around with, maybe it's just New Yorkers, but like, I think they're fucking hilarious. Like everyone has, you know, whether it's humorous or coping mechanism or whatever, that's fine. Like, you know, they're hilarious. Like they're self-aware, they're driven. I mean, I love working with this population because like they do the homework, you know, like they want to put the time in and they really want to be pushed, you know? And so yeah, I mean, I think like obviously there's a selection effect, to use that term again, of like the groups, the people I see, because they are open to learning. They are open to groping. They're sometimes open to that too, but open to growing. Not with me, but like they're open to growing.
This really took a turn.
Yeah. So I'm like, sometimes that's the problem we're working with, but like, no, they're open to growing, you know, they're open. In my case, like a lot of people don't always want to work with like a woman who's oftentimes younger than them. Right. And so there's a lot of humility that can come into that, especially for men who've been taught to like always be kind of in control and in a dominant position. It takes a lot of courage to be like, wow, like maybe I'm actually the common denominator here. And like, I'm the one who maybe needs to do some work, as opposed to like saying everyone around me is incompetent or whatever it is. So yes, I mean, I could go on and on, but I think entrepreneurs, founders, we're all amazing. And honestly, I think are just way too hard on ourselves. Like when it comes down to it.
Like, how do you get a client, right? Like a lot of the startup people, or especially in the beginning, maybe now it's more word of mouth, but I'm wondering in the beginning, like, did you just walk up to some entrepreneurs that really needed it and you're like, look, buddy, I think you need some coaching. And you were like, you're right.
How much do you charge?
$60? I'll meet you at Think Coffee tomorrow.
Here's some cash.
It was City Bakery. City Bakery was my spot. I lived across the street. So no, you know what? I've been so fortunate. It's funny. Like the number of times people have been like, how did you like build your brand? And how did you like build your client base? And I wish I could give you this like strategy, right? But actually what it was like, I was so opinionated and I wrote so many articles. Like, and I didn't write articles thinking it was a content strategy. I didn't even know what a content strategy was at that time, right? Like, again, master's education in psychology, zero education whatsoever in business at that point. So I'm like, I'm just going to write all of these articles because I'm angry about like the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that we're over medicated and people's pain is being pathologized. And really like, it's okay to feel anxious at times and sad and lonely. And these are like normal human emotions that are signals we should be paying attention to. And so like, I was so angry about all of this. And I was like, why are people being told that they're broken when they're not broken? And so not only, of course, did I have my own blog, but I was writing for all of these other publications. And so, but again, I didn't have anything to convert to. Like, I mean, I guess my services, but even at that time, like I wasn't even really like, I think when I first started writing, I was still working at the college and then I was working at that startup. So I wasn't writing thinking, oh, I'll have a private practice that like people are going to convert to. And even now, like, I mean, I have like a book that I don't even really talk about. So it's like, I have sort of an Amazon publishing or Kindle publishing like experiment. So I can like kind of convert to that. But, I don't do a lot of like advertising or marketing. Most people would find me through, again, articles, podcasts, and then Instagram. I ended up getting like, at one point I had a bunch of followers on Instagram. I'm not really that active on there anymore. But I got lucky with like a few people with massive accounts, like reposting my content. So I actually just had people reaching out. And at first I was like, no, like this was before when like people didn't do like a Zoom therapy. So like I was using Skype, if y'all remember that. And like, I was like, I don't know if this is ethical. Like, I only do face-to-face therapy, right? Like this was again, a decade ago at this point almost. And so like at first people were reaching out being like, can I work with you? And I was like, no, I don't take clients. Like I have a job, you know, like I didn't really like see it that way. And so it just kind of like organically grew. And then yes, like I definitely have been very lucky in that I've had a lot of word of mouth clients. You know, you work with one client and they refer you somebody else and they refer you somebody else. And like, then, you know, especially specializing entrepreneurs, they refer you all their entrepreneurial friends. So for the most part, that's kind of been my journey in terms of getting clients. And I like, knock on wood, have been so lucky.
Check this out.
Sure.
So this is, can you see this? I'll just share my
yes.
screen.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if you Google Megan's name, this is like the most optimized result I've ever seen. I'm curious what you think, Taylor. Check this out. Like you've got, you know, these beautiful pictures, but then like Instagram, like you're like somehow, I don't even know how this is possible to like embed like a podcast in it. And you have like the about you, like Google, like basically created a answer for who you are. And then like all the articles you've written on Forbes, like that's like basically, that's like page one. It's just like, it's like, I don't know. What do you think, Taylor?
Amazing. This is like what you would, if you Googled a celebrity.
I had nothing to do with this. Like this is the algorithm or AI or whatever.
Sure.
It was AI.
Yeah. Like I've never like, I wish
AI.
I knew.
It seems like uber optimized. I would have thought it was like a mastermind behind it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. And honestly, I mean, I was a girlfriend that I knew, like sidebar. It's funny. I worked at a yoga studio. I've told this story a couple times on podcasts, but like I worked at a yoga studio when I first finished my master's, because I couldn't get a job straight out of my master's. Like I did a really prestigious program and I was like, I'm for sure going to be fine. And then I like couldn't find a good job, at least for the first like several months. And at the time I was like healing from eating disorders and like dealing with all these over exercising injuries. And I wasn't like allowed to work out based on like my physical therapist's like orders basically. And he's like, the only thing you can do is yoga. And I hated it. I started doing yoga. I was like, this is the worst. This is so boring. but it did start healing my body. And then I realized actually it was starting to really heal my mind as well. So, that's all just to say that I started working at a yoga studio because I couldn't afford yoga. So I was like, I will work at the studio so I can do free yoga, like part-time, and try to get other jobs. And through that, not only did I start writing articles for their blog, which then caused me to write articles. Another company reached out, saw that I'd written articles for their blog and was like, hey, will you write for us? And it was a company called My Yoga Online, which I think is since done, but then became like Gaia or Gaiam TV. And anyway, that was like how I started actually writing for publications. But in addition to that, a woman who worked at the yoga studio had a friend who was like, hey, I'm like just starting out trying to make websites and like brand people. Like, could I do a website for you? And so like, that was like, I guess it was a couple years later that she suggested that, but I met her through the yoga studio. She did my website for like $500 or something. Like it was like something like, so like, I was like, okay, sure. Like I, at the time would never been able to afford like a really nice website that allowed for this to happen. So I've been like very, very lucky. And I think like the lesson for that for people listening is just like, never underestimate the connections you might make, even if they don't seem really obvious. You know, like for me, working for $12 an hour at a yoga studio, like felt so humiliating on some levels. Like it was such a good thing for my ego, right? Especially as I was like getting into spirituality and like coming out of this program where I thought I was a shit, but also had just been totally heartbroken. And so I was like, oh, okay, actually, I guess I'm not. And like, but it was so good because it was like, oh, this is something that I wasn't trying to be like targeted about it. I think like in New York, especially, and also as entrepreneurs, we're always thinking about like, ooh, how can I like leverage this relationship and get to this person? And maybe this person knows this person. And when can I do the ask and like stuff like that? And it takes away from, you know, there is definitely merit in networking and like having kind of like being intentional, I suppose, in some of that, but also like just never underestimate like being kind to somebody and how that might end up resulting in like a really amazing opportunity in the future. And like at the very least, just make you feel good because you're being a kind person, but like, or making their day or whatever. But I just think sometimes like we become so obsessed with productivity as entrepreneurs, and it's fair. Like our time is very valuable. But as a result, we think of everything as having to have like sort of an ROI, right? And like, I would just encourage people to consider that sometimes the ROI isn't there in the moment, but like you can only figure it out looking backwards, as certainly has been the case for me with most of the things in my life.
So speaking of that, it seems that so yoga therapist came from lawyers, but also you're a good writer, and it seems that the writing side actually created some of these opportunities, maybe. And how did that come to be? How do you or maybe you started getting real feedback, really positive feedback, very early on in the writing. How did you become a good writer that knew how to write good things?
I think writing was always a coping mechanism for me. Like I was the person who like would write like dark poetry as like a depressed teenager, or like an angsty teenager, and songs, but they weren't.
Did you have a live journal?
No, I never had a live journal, but also I feel like in Canada, there were a lot of things we didn't have. We didn't have like MySpace or things like that. Like, I don't know how old you guys are. I think I'm like maybe a little older. I'm not sure, but like, yeah, I didn't have that stuff. So no, I didn't, but we did get like a desktop computer when I was like in 11th grade or something. And I remember like going on the computer.
Wait, what did you have? We had MySpace in Romania. How did you not have MySpace in Canada?
Yeah, how did you not have MySpace in Canada?
Okay, we probably did, but like it wasn't a thing. Like it wasn't a thing that people did. Like I feel like we used like MSN Messenger, and I think you guys used like AOL, right? Like
we used AIM.
Or AIM, oh, right? Yeah, AIM, right? Exactly.
AOL Instant Messenger.
So there's just like those little cultural differences. At least in my world, nobody used MySpace. So yes, but I do remember getting like a desktop computer, like in I think it was like maybe 11th grade, and we didn't have like the internet or anything, but I remember just like going on Microsoft Word or whatever it was and just like writing. And so here's my kitty, by the way. So there, I have a new kitten who's just made an appearance for anybody who's listening and can't see. But for people who are watching, here she is. Her name's Lexi. Lexi, named after Lexington Avenue in New York, for a little piece of New York for us. Nice. So yeah, writing, I always did it as like a coping mechanism. I think it was some way that I kind of like processed my thoughts and like made sense of whatever I was dealing with emotionally. And then, in my master's, I started out doing a master's of education, and partway through, my supervisor was like, you're an excellent writer. You should be switching to the Master of Arts and be doing a thesis. And because Master of Education was just a different program in terms of like how, like, I mean, it still was pretty much the same degree, but just like a little bit in terms, there's more research basically in the Masters of Arts. And so getting that feedback from her, I was like, oh, wow. Like, thank you. You think I'm really good, right? Like, thanks. I think I'd taken like an English class in, my first or second year of university and like not gotten 100% and being like as perfectionistic as I was like, oh my God, I'm terrible at this. I didn't like ace the class. So it was good to like get that feedback. And then, I think the blog I started, again, it was like after that heartbreak when I was just like, fuck it. I'm just doing all the things that scare me. I don't care anymore. Like all these things I've been so held back from, I'm just going to do. And, it started out just like, I started out writing from a very like objective kind of like research oriented perspective. It was called One Shrink's Perspective was my blog. And it was very like, talk about sleep and depression and this and that. And then it started to morph more into like my own personal experiences and like writing kind of that into articles that ultimately, ideally, help people because they can connect to it personally, but then also like get some like credible information out of it as well.
Feels like his breakup actually was a good thing.
Oh my God, it was the best thing.
Like the best thing in your life.
Yeah, it truly was. And honestly, like, I mean, I think, it's interesting. So I have a podcast myself, which I do not keep up with as much as you guys do. You guys are inspiring me, which is called The Failure Factor. And the whole idea is like through failure, through things like heartbreak or rock bottom or whatever, we actually get this like edge because we realize like we live out our worst fears and we realize that we can come back from shame, depression, heartbreak, whatever failure means to us and stuff like that. And so I think like for me with that heartbreak, I had spent, especially because like my dad had left my mom and I'd seen her like crumble and, be pretty incapacitated for years and what it did to our family. And I think I'd spent most of my life being like, oh, at least up until that point in my 20s, well, the worst thing that can happen to me is heartbreak. Like, right? Like you see your parent like be like catatonically depressed for years and you're like, that's the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And then you live out the worst thing that could happen to you. And you're like, oh, I mean, this fucking sucks. Don't get me wrong. It still takes a couple of years to get over or whatever, but like you can't help but grow. You can't help but realize like you are stronger than you thought you were. You are deeply resilient. Humans are programmed to heal. And I think the same thing goes for entrepreneurs. Like so many entrepreneurs have had a previous failure or multiple failures, or they do fail in like whatever that first company is or that first idea. And, ideally, I mean, again, privilege does come into this, but like ideally, they're able to grow from that and learn from that and recognize that's just part of the journey, So yes, that's a long answer to the breakup was the best thing ever.
All right. Let's talk about psychedelics. How like ketamine is actually about to be legalized in Canada. It's also legalized in a lot of places here. And so I'm wondering, what do you think of that interacting with coaching and therapy? And
so, I mean, I'm a huge supporter of psychedelics as like an adjunct to this work, with like an asterisk for sure. Like, I think unfortunately, they're like the way that psychedelics are being talked about right now in our culture does sort of paint them as a silver bullet. Like, this is the answer. Like, just do ketamine and like, you'll never be depressed again. Right. Or like, go do ayahuasca and like all your problems will be solved. And
wait, that's not true.
Yeah. I'm here. It's funny. Like I've done some training myself in like, guiding and whatnot and working with psychedelics and bringing them into the therapy room and whatnot. And like, one of the things that they stress so much is like expectation setting, right? Because it's so true. Like people think, okay, great. I'm going to do my psilocybin journey or my MDMA therapy or, go do 5-MeO DMT because I heard about it on Joe Rogan or whatever. And it's going to like cure all my problems. And I mean, don't get me wrong, on a personal level, I've done a lot of them and I have had incredible experiences, deeply, deeply profound, powerful experiences that I do not believe I could have possibly accessed, without the use of that medicine. And I've done Vipassana retreats where you're silent for 10 days. I've done years and years of yoga. I've done tons and tons of therapy. And so I'm a big, big believer in their healing possibilities, properties, stuff like that. But just like any kind of like element of healing, I mean, in a silo, they're not a solution, right? I mean, they can be used for good, and they can also be deeply re-traumatizing for people if used in the right set or the wrong setting, I should say, or, if for a person who's maybe not in the right mindset or doesn't have the coping skills to be able to navigate the emotional discomfort that might be unearthed, or perhaps memories that can be really distressing. So I guess, yes, like I think they are the future for sure. I'm super excited about like the possibility of legalization, especially for psilocybin and MDMA in the coming years. There's a lot of really promising research coming out of MAPS, which is like suggesting that for PTSD, for example, they just released a study that MDMA has like a significant impact on PTSD in comparison to a control group. And they had a long-term study going on. And so, yeah, there's so much possibility there. I love psychedelics personally. Like, I think that they're amazing. And I think that it's important for us to be educated consumers. Ketamine is a big one right now that has a lot of like VC backed funding for a lot of these ketamine companies. And as a result, they're wanting to scale. And it's very difficult to balance scaling something or like balancing like the breadth of something with like the depth of the work. So if you want to have like QC, like really strong, if you want to, I guess, support your clients, your individual clients in a program like that, it doesn't always align with scaling as quickly as possible, right? Or like at home ketamine treatments and stuff like that. So I think it's important for the consumer to be really educated. And I think that's what's interesting right now is, people are becoming more educated, which is great. But the question for me, I think where I feel torn is like, is it on the consumer or is it on the company for making sure there's like as much transparency as possible? Like, I like to think that if a person goes to like a psychic or something, like it's kind of on the consumer to know that like, hey, like there's not like a ton of research behind this, but it does help a lot of people. And like, great. But if you want to pay $500 or whatever to this person and, what they tell you isn't right, kind of on you, like,
Taylor recently did this.
Yeah. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. How was it? Yeah. No, which can be super helpful.
I've done both. Oh, yeah. I love how you walk it back. No, it's great. No, everybody loves it. It's wonderful.
Things are good.
I've seen it be good for people.
Yeah, totally. No, it's not that I'm not a believer, but I guess like it's like, where there are areas where it's harder to research something like that, right? And harder to, regulate and whatever else. It's like, okay, we got to be educated consumers. And I think psychedelics are sort of somewhere in the middle, right? Because you're trusting the person who's like telling you, or educating you basically on like what your experience might be and how it's going to help you and the purpose and stuff. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there. So I think I'm hopeful that in the coming years, there's going to be a lot more like common knowledge around like how psychedelics are tools and not silver bullets, and like what's important to make sure that, you kind of optimize your setting for a fruitful journey. And how like integration, for example, is like a really necessary, important part. Like you don't just go out with a bunch of friends and like, smoke a DMT pen, like in a group and like, not go through the integration process or, do a bunch of mushrooms, like, I mean,
in the woods.
Yeah, exactly. Like in the woods, like, and it's again, sometimes that is the right thing, but it's like, if it's your first time and you're taking 5 grams and you're wanting to like, have a ego death, like don't do that. Right. So yeah, I think it's, my answer is like, yes, super excited, fully in support. And also like do your research, like don't be impulsive about it. Make sure you're safe. Make sure you don't have contraindications in terms of medications you're taking. And make sure you do integration, which means like, in the days and weeks following, make sure you're, going back to what the lessons were that came out of the experience and ideally integrating with a person who's trained in facilitating that.
So I have one other question around like, how do you recommend founders make decisions? What have you seen the most effective founders that you worked with or been around? How do they make decisions? What have you learned from that? Yeah,
it's a good question. And I wish there was like a formula, right? Where we could just like feed our decision making, be like, okay, well, there's a flow chart and this has to have this question, then go here. Like, I don't know, maybe we should try to design that. But, I think a couple things. First of all, one thing that I think is really important for founders to get in touch with before making decisions, and this goes for like within their company, but also like just in their personal life and whatnot, is like get in touch with your values, right? Like founders are so indoctrinated into this whole like hustle culture that's like grow at all costs. And oh my God, somebody wants to invest in you, take the investment and like, like scale, like, and it's not always the right answer, like that might not always be what a person, what's going to support like a person, the lifestyle that they want or something sustainable. And a lot of the times we make decisions more from that place of ego, which I know doesn't really like mean anything to people who don't speak that language. But I guess that idea of like, it's not so much about like what I truly want and what really feels authentic to me. It's like what I think I should want, or what it's that person did. Right. And unfortunately, when we're not super in touch with our own values or needs or, and aren't self-aware enough really to recognize where maybe it is something like ego or like, the, that should voice or like wanting to kind of like have more power and more money and be like the dude who, like is flying the private jet and stuff like that. Then we tend to make decisions based on like, oh, well, that person did that. So I should do that too. Or this like mentor of mine.
That was a little triggering. Maybe I actually really want to be like that dude.
Yeah, I actually want to be that guy. That guy sounds great.
Well, maybe we should turn this into a therapy session, guys. Like, let's get into that. What do you think will happen in your life when you get the private jet?
Well, I don't know, but I'd like to see.
What armor will it provide for you? What difficult feelings?
A lot less frustration waiting in TSA. That's for damn shit.
Yeah, no TSA. Yeah. That sounds pretty good.
Okay, so okay, maybe the private jet's not a great example, but I guess first thing is like getting in touch with like who you like, what you value. Like when you think about, okay, a lot of us still are young enough that we're not thinking about death all the time, right? But we should think about more mortality more often. We should think about more like, hey, if I should be so lucky as to live another 30, 40, 50 years, when I'm on my deathbed, again, if I like have that like luxury of being able to reflect on my life and be with the loved ones around me and whatnot, like what's going to be important to me? Like, what are going to be my regrets? What will I be happy I did? What will I wish I did more of? What will I wish I did less of? That kind of thing. And a lot of people don't think about that kind of stuff. They don't really get in touch with their values. With my clients, I tend to, when we first start working together, I tend to send them a questionnaire of like those types of questions. And also like, who do you admire and why? Like who do you perceive as mentors? Who like living or dead, known or not known, like is somebody's life that you want to emulate? And like, what is it about that to help a person get in touch with like, what is important to you? And
wait, what else is on the questionnaire?
I'll have to pull it up. Honestly, I should share it, but it's like, yeah, it's a lot of that kind of stuff, right? Like it's a lot of just reflecting on like when we try to strip away, like the things that we do to hide from shame, like what actually do we want our life to look like? I mean, so many of us we're influenced understandably by capitalism and materialism and like industries that tell us that because you aren't thin enough or tall enough or, rich enough or, driving enough boats or like whatever it is, like there's something wrong with you, right? So like buy this thing, buy this thing, buy this thing. That is at the core of marketing is your life will be better if you buy this. Like, right. You're not enough as you are. So buy this. And that, I mean, for women, of course, we know this intimately in terms of our appearance, but it's the same thing for men. It's about like power and material items and women. And the way to get women is to have money. And like, so we're all indoctrinated into this same kind of culture that tells us that like, we're not enough as we are. And as a result, we're constantly feeling shame and comparing ourselves to like that person on Instagram or that person, on TV or whatever, who we perceive to like have it all figured out and be happier than us. And we think when I get to that point, when I get the private jet, when I lose the 20 pounds, whatever it is, then I'm finally going to be happy. And like, that's just not how it works, right? Because the reality is our difficult emotions are going to be with us for life. We will always feel frustration. Maybe it's not at the, TSA when we get the private jet, but there will be another place when we feel frustration or grief or sadness or loneliness or disappointment or anxiety. Like these are just human emotions that are there. And so the real work, the real spiritual path is learning how to be with those emotions and respond to them in a way that's kind rather than like self-critical and judgmental or avoiding them. And I'm getting to the end of your question, or I will get to your question here, Taylor, because the reason I'm telling you this is to support what I'm about to say. So basically, like part one on the questionnaire, a lot of it is helping people unpack like, hey, when we strip away that stuff, like what do I want my life to look like? If I can get to a point where I don't care so much about like what people think or trying to like fulfill this narrative that society's constructed for me that's grounded in capitalism and materialism and media and whatnot, what actually brings me joy? What actually will make me happy? And usually it's connection. It's meaning. It's like being in the service of others in a way that's not like totally self-sacrificing, but makes you feel good because you're getting those two things. It's health. It's like balance. It's being able to get rest. It's being able to take care of your body and eat well and like, be able to have your nervous system be regulated and stuff like that. And so the questionnaire part is, yes, stripping away some of that and helping people hone in on like what they really want. And then when it comes to the decision-making piece, so many of our decisions we make because we're trying to avoid those uncomfortable feelings. Either the uncomfortable feelings that I mentioned, such as like, frustration, loneliness, disappointment, anxiety, anger, hurt, all that kind of stuff, or it's trying to avoid the shame that we feel like for having the feelings, the shame that we feel for where we believe that we're wrong or bad or broken because we're constantly judging ourselves and comparing ourselves to like an ideal. And that's why like I do push back sometimes against like the super extreme like biohacking, optimizing culture that's like get up and do your morning routine and this and this and that and this and this and that. And like you're always trying to be better, be better, be better. It's like, again, walking back, that's totally fine if it's serving you, right? But if it's coming from a place of control, I need to constantly be rigid about everything in my life because this makes me feel a sense of control. And if not, I feel this like anxiety that's uncomfortable for me because actually I'm not totally in control of my life and bad things can and will happen and I will die one day and the people close to me will die. And, my company, there might be something that goes wrong with the company or I might embarrass myself or I might hurt someone or someone might hurt me or whatever. Like instead of this, okay, I'm going to do a whole bunch more ice baths and hope that never happens. It's learning how to respond to ourselves in a way that's really compassionate. And so when we talk about decision making, what I work with founders to do is help them gain the emotional intelligence to recognize where they're making a decision from that place of like authenticity and where they're making one from more, it's cliche to say, but fear or avoidance of these uncomfortable emotions. And that also translates to like, if they have some sort of like unhealthy habit or vice or whatever, right? Whether it's drugs or sex or work, a lot of the time actually is a numbing or avoidance mechanism. That is often something we're doing to avoid difficult emotions, or avoiding taking the risk, fundraising, if that makes sense in your business. And you're not just doing it because again, you think that that's like the only way to success is growing as big as possible, as quickly as possible. But yes, like marketing or fundraising, networking, public speaking, going on podcasts, things like this, like that can be uncomfortable, helping people work through whether or not that's something they really don't want to do or they're not doing it because there's a fear there of the vulnerability of exposure, shame, failure, rejection, abandonment, stuff like that. So again, there's no flowchart there, but I guess like the how do you make a decision is really tapping into, as humans, we're driven to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Try to determine what you're motivated by in this moment that you want to make the decision. Ask yourself like, hey, if I knew that like this thing that I'm avoiding, if it were to happen and I could like, I wouldn't be super upset by it or I wouldn't feel all this shame or like these stories I'm telling myself about people abandoning me and like the company failing weren't going to happen. Like, would that change things for me?
Love it. As we wrap, any kind of final tips you have for founders, especially those just starting out and early in their journey?
Yeah.
And then where can people find you?
Sure.
And that great Google page.
And this great kitty. So, okay, tips for founders starting out. Honestly, I think there's so many important things, but I think like the biggest one, and this is probably not new for your listeners, is like find community. Find other founders, communities of other founders, surround yourself by people who are both like where you are and like doing similar things. Doesn't have to be the same industry or whatever, but who are also kind of like figuring out and building and growing, who can inspire you. And then also like expanders, people who are maybe like a couple steps ahead of you, right? Like not so far that it's like, oh my gosh, like I could never be that, that person or whatever, right? Like how could I ever get there? Which like I think women tend to think more than men. Like I think men are socialized more to be like, you can be anything you want, do whatever you do, and women are like, you can maybe be a mother one day if you're pretty enough. And so like, so it's a little, that's extreme, but it's like, it's a little different. Like women do tend to not believe in ourselves as much as we should. And I'm guilty of that myself. But, so surround yourself by people who are like a few steps ahead of you, who can show you what's possible, right? Because then you're like, oh, wait, but this person is where I was a couple of years ago and they just did this and this and that. So I should be able to do that too. Interesting. Like that is going to be so, so important. But then also, for the like community piece and sorry, I'm going to put this cat down, the community piece. And so that you're less isolated, because it is something, I have like amazing, amazing friends back home in Vancouver, but they're lawyers and nurses and teachers and like social workers. And they're all so brilliant and like so good at their jobs. But it's harder for me to talk to them about, the digital product that I want to create and whether or not I really feel like it's worth it to keep putting content on Instagram, because it feels really like I'm just opening myself up to a lot of people who want to criticize me. And like the conversion isn't really there. Like, it's like, I can't have those conversations with those types of people, not because like they're not supportive and wonderful, but because they don't speak that language. So I think it's really important to surround yourself by people who not only inspire you, but that you can almost treat as like de facto colleagues, especially when you're first starting out and you don't have colleagues or co-founders or partners or whatever, especially if you're a solopreneur. So I think that would be the first thing I would say. And then the other thing, I mean, there's so many things I could say, but another big one is beyond self-compassion, which I already mentioned, which is like make room for the messiness. It's not a straight line. Like you're going to learn so much, but like what you're going to learn the most of through is failure and disappointment and mistakes and all of that kind of stuff. And so like definitely make room for all of that and be kind to yourself and trust it's all part of the process. And like, a fuck up doesn't make you a fuck up, all that kind of stuff. And then I think the other big thing too is boundaries and self-care. And I know those are words we use a lot in the mental health world and they may have lost all meaning. But I remember someone telling me years and years ago, like, when you say no, you're actually saying yes. You're saying yes to something that's more important. You're saying yes to something that's more valuable to you. You're saying yes to something that you're going to prioritize instead. And so no is like a really, really good thing to learn how to say, right? But to yourself and to others as well, right? Because we also have to set boundaries with ourselves in some areas. And so the boundaries piece, and then with self-care, again, a lot of founders think in the beginning, they're like, but I heard these stories about people sleeping on the couches and working 20-hour days and this and this and this for years. And like, sometimes that is the way. But also like that's often the way to burn out. And then when you burn out, it's really hard to come back from that. And it's also really hard to not resent what you do and what you're building. And so I really, really advocate for people to like build in self-care as though it's part of your job, like get the massage, go for the walk and listen to the podcast, like hang out with the friend that you're not talking about business with, go to the movie or like down the Netflix hole or Instagram hole or whatever it is, like be intentional about it and don't shame yourself for that. Like you need that, to help your nervous system regulate and to help be able to continue to sustain. Because if we wanted to, we could work all the time. Like that's the thing. Like there's no 9 to 5 here. Like you could be like, yeah, I guess I should be working, or I have work to do, so I should be working. And when we grow up in homes where our parents told us you can't play until you get all your chores done or until you get all your homework done, it can feel very like conflicted or guilt ridden to enjoy yourself when there's like work to do. So I guess I would just really encourage people, like not only from a place of like just being happy, but actually from like a sustainability place and not resenting the work so that you can actually keep going through the more challenging stuff, to be just like really taking care of yourself.
I love it. Those are great tips.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming on, Megan. Where can people find you and reach out to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, the website that I think, or I guess you didn't go to the website, but it sounds like Google, like it's the place to go. But I don't know what's on there. I know you're going to find a lot on there. But yeah, so just my first name, last name, .com. So meganbruneau.com, meganbruneau.com. And then my Instagram, as I said, like there's a lot on there. I used to post a lot more regularly. I feel like Instagram's kind of like not as, do you guys feel like Instagram's like kind of like we aren't into Instagram as much as we used to? I guess everyone's on TikTok now. Or is that just me?
I'm still on it.
Okay. No, I was still on it, but I feel like it's like not as like, okay, maybe.
Maybe I'm the old man on it. I don't know.
I feel like Instagram's going to be like the Facebook in like the next, like,
yeah, like the new face. Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so on Instagram, I'm Megan J. Bruneau at Megan J. Bruneau. So MEGANJBRUNEAU. Recently, I got kicked off of Twitter. I don't know why. Like, apparently I violated the rules, but my account got hacked. So I would say come find me on Twitter, but my account has been suspended and I'm trying to figure that one out. So if anyone knows...
Elon? Maybe Elon can hook you up.
How to get a Twitter comeback? Yeah. If anyone knows Elon, if you're listening, like, I know you like might be busy. I just bought a Tesla, Elon, just so you know. So like, can you please not suspend my Twitter account anymore? So yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for coming on, Megan.
Yeah,
thanks, Megan.
Rock. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you for rocking with the homies. Taylor, Trusty, and Flavio. Seize the day, own it. Until next time, hold it down, hold it down. Hey.